breaking news. President Trump announced it's time to restart this testing. And of course, he's saying we're restarting the testing because essentially the top three others are starting to test, and they're testing even more, including Russia, China, a little bit below that. But Russia they've at least claimed they've been trying out these missiles that are going 8,000 miles. That's right. And President Trump responded saying, hey, we don't have to travel 8,000 miles. We got a nuclear sub right outside of Russia in the water. So you know what? It escalates. It's a little concerning. I think we should have discussed this. What do you think about this? Obviously, there is a lot of debate. President Trump seems to want to completely end these programs, but it's almost a peace through strength moment here, saying, by saying we're going to test it, will it inevitably end with the dissolution of it? I don't know if that's the case. Obviously, these are concerning times. Whenever anyone starts talking about this, it should be taken very seriously. Let's hear from President Trump. He was on Air Force One yesterday talking about this.
Write your Truth Social about nuclear testing. What about resuming nuclear testing? What prompted you to do that right before the meeting?
It had to do with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing.
Russia?
We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
And that puts up a lot of signs. Look, I understand that it is a big response to what's happening internationally. So you have Russia and China, two of your biggest countries you have to deal with, many of which are, you would say, at this point, not on the best terms. China, less on bad terms than Russia, but still China. And of course, Russia is in the middle of a war that they don't seem to want to wrap up, a war with Ukraine. That President Trump was, pretty confident he was going to be able to wrap up very quickly, but now he's saying that working with Vladimir Putin right now, it's simply not moving anywhere. So now we're saying, again, peace through strength, I guess is what you'd say. Once again, saying, you know what? We have more nukes than anyone. You start threatening us with saying we have a nuclear missile that can go 8,000 miles. Well, guess what? We got submarines right off your coast, ready to go. We don't need 8,000 miles. That's what President Trump said. That's legitimately what he said in talking about this. Now, that kind of conversation should raise red flags, as it does for a lot of Americans, but it should raise red flags for around the world that you don't want to not treat this seriously. Obviously, when we start playing around with nuke talk, it should make us all uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable, but at least President Trump has suggested, even in this interview yesterday, this conversation with reporters on Air Force One, that he would like to see it end. He would like to see all of it end. He would like to see a denuclearization of the world. And he said he's been talking about that with Russia and with China. But again, to not use, I guess, what you have and to make sure it's all working just in case.
People need to understand that nuke testing is extremely important. We have to make sure that our stockpiles are working, that they're able to be used. This is about peace through strength. This is not about using them, but making sure that people know that we do have not just a threat, but a credible threat. As a diplomat, as somebody who hates war, I love nuke testing. And here's why. Because when a diplomat is sitting at the table, the best thing in the world is to have President Trump behind us saying, I want our diplomats to succeed, but if we have to transfer this file to the Pentagon, they don't negotiate. So negotiate hard with our diplomats. Let's make sure that we have a peaceful settlement. The alternative is for you to have the entire situation given over to Pete Hegseth at the Department of War. They don't negotiate, they just protect. So I love having a credible threat behind us. And one thing that we've known about President Trump is that he uses the credible threat to make sure that he protects Americans, and that the other side always knows that there is a threat of tariffs, some peaceful maneuvering of sanctions or other tools of the United States government, but there's also a possibility of direct military strikes. That combination makes President Trump very credible.
Having those tools, as you said, especially when President Trump has been more than willing, especially with early on. There's certainly a breaking point for him, and I think maybe we're getting there in terms of Russia and everything that's going on, where he's been willing to sit down and have these meetings and try to figure out all of the peaceful ways to get things done. Unlike the Biden administration, who decided, no, if we deem you a quote-unquote bad guy, we're not even going to return your calls.
I think people need to calm down here and realize that we're having an adult conversation. We're talking about being prepared, not pulling the trigger. And there's a huge difference. And if you're the U.S. government, put yourself in the situation where you're the leader of the free world. You can't just say, we're giving up all of our nukes, and so come get us. You have to be able to be smart about protecting the American people. President Trump has demonstrated over and over and over again that he values human life, that he rescues our hostages, that he's protecting the American people, both from a prosperous standpoint and from a national security standpoint. And so we need to be able to make sure that we have a credible threat, not just a threat. This is exactly what the president is doing. People need to listen very carefully to what is being discussed and not get duped by the media into thinking that something else is happening.
The one story that seems to keep coming up, and that is, of course, the media's freak out over some comments that came in about a third term for President Trump. I feel like this just it's another story. It's the ballroom of this week that just keeps rolling on. I just got to get your thoughts. This, it feels like, President Trump will sometimes push it forward a little bit, but he said pretty clearly, I don't think I could do it. I'm pretty sure that's not allowed. But you know what? If you want to keep talking about it, we're not going to stop the story.
I just got a hat that says Trump 2028. I love it because I love the conversations that ensue. Do I think that Trump is running in 2028? No, I don't. And people, we need to use a little humor here. And if the media is a business, don't hate the billionaire who is an amazing businessman who knows what sells. And that's President Donald Trump.
And it's not only that. I mean, there is the message points of, look, the Republican Party, I think, in general, was changed forever with President Trump. And I think that we'd be lying to ourselves to think it's going to go back in some ways anytime in the near future. Yeah, so I think when you hear a Trump 2028, it's not necessarily saying President Trump. It's saying, look, this is probably a similar agenda that could be moving forward.
That's a fantastic spin. Can I start using that, Logan?
Absolutely. We've talked about nukes. Now we've talked about Trump third term. The only other thing we haven't talked about, and I think you can maybe briefly discuss this. Of course, we spent a lot of time this morning and it feels like the last 10 years, I think we've talked about Jack Smith here and now Arctic Frost, where we've seen now more pushes and more releases saying not only was it the people that are around President Trump, then it was like a senator that may have called him once, to now saying that they were looking at the phone records of major media organizations, Fox, CBS even, Sinclair, that it just seems like it keeps going deeper and deeper. As someone who was there, Rick, and someone that what it's like on the inside, how you feeling about all this?
Let's just say thank you, Chuck Grassley. If you live in Iowa, if you see Chuck Grassley, you have to thank him for all of his work on this. Absolutely. I loved working with him when I was DNI. He is someone who is digging into these issues.
Yeah, no joke.
He doesn't just take the government's word for it, no matter who's in charge. He's the one who unearthed this. And we see Jack Smith is somebody who has literally been politicizing all of these investigations. I hope he's prosecuted.